I had been living in America for 4 years, but I had never seen anyone like him. He was as thin as he looked, but he was as powerful as he was. As soon as he offered me to spend the night with him, I couldn't stop myself. I thought, what is this? When I have spent the night with so many powerful men, I will go with him to his flat because of his offer. But as soon as I went there, I realized that he was not as weak as he looked, but inside he had the strength of a mountain. While living in a city like America, I met a Pakistani for the first time. His personality had a strange attraction that was drawing me towards him. He was not like other men at all. He was completely innocent and seemed to come from a good home. I was a girl from a poor family. I had spent my whole life in deprivation. My father had left me and my mother alone when I was a child and gone somewhere. My mother had worked all her life and raised me and her own family, but my mother had always taught me to live with restraint and never let anyone take advantage of me. My mother had raised me very lovingly. She did indeed work in their homes, but still, she had never let me do any work. As soon as I turned 18, I came to know that my mother had developed a lung disease. Her health was deteriorating day by day, but she still did not let her condition affect me. She worked all day, and in the evening, laughing and playing, she would break pieces of bread with her hands and feed me. As the days passed, my mother's health also deteriorated. I was now 19 years old, and my mother was bedridden. She had a serious illness that required a lot of money for treatment. I didn't have a single rupee. I would have bought some medicine for my mother. I didn't understand anything about what to do. In such a situation, I begged the village Chaudhry for money, but Chaudhry agreed to give me money on one condition, which was that he would take interest. I didn't understand anything, and I didn't have any means. All my relatives had turned away. I was the only heir to myself and my mother. I didn't lack anything else. I told Chaudhry Sahib that I would take the money on interest and also said that I would return the money to Chaudhry Sahib within 4 months, and if I did not return the money, I would pay interest, that is, I would return double the amount. Chaudhry Sahib gave me the money, for which I thanked him, and the next day I reached the hospital with my mother. It was the biggest hospital in the city, and then also in Fadra. The very next day, my mother's treatment had started because the hospital people had no interest in where a poor person was getting money from. If they had any interest, it was only from their fees and their expensive medicines, which they had to sell in double tax in any way. Only 3 days had passed since my mother's treatment started. I stayed with my mother in the hospital the whole day. Half of the money I had borrowed was used to cover the expenses of my mother's treatment, and the other half I would take some food for myself and my mother as it was being spent. One day, my mother's condition suddenly deteriorated, and her body became completely cold, and her eyes looked up at the sky. I became very worried, and in my worry, I started calling the doctors. "Doctor, where is the doctor? My mother's condition has deteriorated. Please, is there anyone?" I started calling like crazy. In the meantime, a doctor and a lady doctor both entered my mother's room and told me that my mother's condition was very bad, and she would only be able to live for 1 or 2 more days. In the meantime, I started looking at the sky in worry. The doctor apologized and walked away, and I stood there watching them go. My mother called me to her and barely managed to make a sound, as if she wanted to say something. I immediately moved forward and listened to her. She was asking me who my father was and where he was. I had not heard about my father until today, so I felt a little strange. My mother told me the sign of my father and said that after me, your son will be your guardian. So if he comes to take you, go with him. I was worried that my mother had never said such a thing until now. Why was she doing this today? Right now, I was thinking that my mother's health had deteriorated, and before I knew it, my mother had left this world and gone forever. After my mother left, I was completely helpless. No one was ready to take my responsibility. I reached the village alone with my mother's dead body, so the village Chaudhry took pity and arranged for my mother's burial. After the burial of my mother, everyone went to their respective homes and I sat alone in a corner of my own house. I was unaware of anything because I was completely homeless. At that moment, I remembered the money Chaudhry had given me. How would I repay his debt? Now I was worried more than food. I was more worried about his debt, which I had to repay with interest, because I thought that if my mother recovered, she would take care of all the arrangements herself, but my mother had already left me homeless. I started to worry a lot as the days passed by, and finally, one day I heard someone knocking on the door. As soon as I opened the door, I saw that the Chaudhry's servant had come to take me to the camp. I got worried. Why did this Chaudhry call me to the camp? Maybe he won't demand money. I got worried. I tried to avoid it by making excuses, but the man was adamant about taking me with him. I followed him silently because I had no other choice. As soon as I reached the camp, I saw that Chaudhry Sahib was smoking a hookah and was probably waiting for me to come. As soon as he saw me, Chaudhry Sahib said, "Will you work at our house? Because I am fully aware of your situation. No one is ready to hire you to work at their house. So are you willing to work at our house? In return, I will waive the interest on your loan, and in return, I will give you free food and accommodation. If you are willing, you can go and work at my house." For work, I found this offer no less than a blessing, and I immediately accepted it because I had no other choice. I immediately accepted it. Chaudhry Sahib sent me to his house with a man. As soon as I reached in front of the house, I went to the house. It was a palace. There, a woman told me what to do. I was very worried. How would she do all the work, who had never broken a piece of bread with her own hands in her entire life? So I decided to do all the work, and a broom started sweeping in a room. As soon as I entered the room, I felt the presence of a strange person there. As I turned around, I saw that person was none other than Chaudhry's son. That person had come from America. His wife and children were still in America, but he had come here alone. As soon as I saw him there, I was about to leave the room when he blocked my way and touched me in a strange and wrong way, which I found completely unpleasant. I quickly withdrew my hand. I was shocked and about to leave when he suddenly locked the door and threw me on the bed. I started screaming, but my screams had no effect on him. He tore my clothes and violated my dignity. Not only did he play with my dignity, but he also took some pictures and videos of me and started blackmailing me every day. I, who was a good and pious girl, had tarnished my piety in one fell swoop, and I was insensitive. Now that man would blackmail me every day and quench my lust for my body. I had become a toy in his hands. If I told anyone, he would threaten to leak my video and I would become silent. A few days later, I found out that his visa had arrived, so my breathing felt a little relieved. I thought that maybe now I would be released. But what did I know? Another sorrow was waiting for me. This man had also got my visa and told my family that my wife needed a maid, and I would take her with me. In fact, he had already known my truth that I had no one in this world, and no one was going to question me. So he told this fabricated story to his family and put me on a flight and brought me to America. As soon as I set foot on American soil, I realized how dirty this land was. Women everywhere were making small. I was wearing short clothes, and the environment here seemed very strange to me. When I reached here, I felt that something bad was going to happen to me, and it really happened. That person would make me the object of his lust every day. And when he was satisfied, he started taking me to a club where girls would dance and sing in short clothes. For me, all this was very wrong because the family I belonged to was a very noble family, but he had trampled on my nobility long ago. Now, he had immersed me in his environment because I had no other choice. I also dressed myself in short clothes and started going to the club with him to win the heart of every man. In the beginning, I found all this very wrong because these things were very different from the environment I came from. It was very wrong for girls to dress immodestly and attract men to themselves. But here, everything was normal. No one was worried. No one felt any difference between sin and reward. That man would take me to dance parties every day and would ask me to attract men there, but I didn't want to do that. After all, my size was so attractive that every man there would fall for me. Along with fair skin, my body was a very beautiful model, and every man there wanted such beauty. The kind of clothes I wore, if any man saw me, his heart would definitely want to sleep with me. All this was very strange for me, but what could I do? I was forced to take a sip of poison and started rubbing myself in his skin. It had become a habit for me to wear short clothes and be with this man at such a party. Now I had also understood my heart, which I had to do in every situation, and I was crying and crying, but this person was using me according to his will. When I was no longer that young girl, my conscience was dead. Now I started doing this work of my own free will, because I had to do this work in every situation, whether I did it under compulsion or of my own free will. Finally, one day, when I went home from the dance party, I found out that this person had settled my deal with a blonde under a project. So I was left in a state of shock, because I knew very well what was going to happen to me now. But what could I do? Anyway, I decided to go with this person because if I did not go, that person would leak my video. Once again, I decided to go with this blonde with a stone in my heart, and I was ready to go with this blonde. I had no other choice. That man took me to a flat and kept making me the object of his lust all night. How much pain I suffered. This man did not show mercy even once. He oppressed me in every way, and I had to bear all this. For a few days he made me his victim, and when he was satisfied, he also started taking me to dance parties. And once again, I was a bargain. Now I had become so lazy that whenever he wanted, he would send me to another friend's house and that person would satisfy his lust all night, and then the next day it would be the turn of another friend. I was fed up with this life, but what could I do? If the person who brought me into this world did not become my shelter, then how would the rest of the people feel pity for me? When not my father, but he turned his back on me, how could other people pity me? I tried to adapt myself to this environment so that I would not suffer much pain and suffering. I had adapted myself to this environment. Now I did not feel bad at all. Spending the night with anyone had become a normal thing for me. I stayed in one man's bed the whole night, and sometimes I had to do all this with 2 to 4 men. But now I did not feel any fault in these things at all, because perhaps now I had become used to all of them. Finally, I made some girls my friends and started smoking and drinking with them. All this had become fashionable for me now. I had also adapted to this environment. I started doing completely frivolous things. Teasing boys and attracting men to me was a normal thing for me. I had to do all this to feed myself. One day, I was doing such frivolous things when suddenly, my eyes fell on a nobleman. I thought this man was Pakistani. I had not seen a single Pakistani man here since I came to America. But as soon as I saw him, I was shocked. He was a very thin young boy, but I could clearly see a warmth inside him. I thought that the arrangements for the evening meal had been made. I just sent him flying, and he started coming towards me. I thought, let's arrange for dinner today. But this boy spoke to me in a very nice way and told me that this did not suit me because he was Pakistani. I was very surprised to hear the name of Pakistani from his mouth because this was the first person I had ever met. He recognized me so quickly. All the other men who had come into my life so far were just users. But this was the first person who looked at me with nothing but respect. I felt a strange love and sympathy in his words. I talked to him a few times and I felt as if he had known me for days. Eventually, we started meeting and I felt as if I was special to him. I started hating drinking and smoking. I became the girl I was before I came to America. Now I had even stopped going to dance parties because I had started making myself worthy of it. I had thought in my mind that I would tell him everything about my past, so I invited him to my house and started making a deal that maybe he would fulfill his request like the other men. But he did not even look at me, which increased my respect for him even more. I thought that I would tell the truth, and I told him everything about my past, the way I was before and the way I have become now. I thought that he would hate me after knowing my true nature, but that didn't happen. He respected me and said that he was with me in every decision, but I had to make a promise to him. What kind of promise? I asked him while looking at him, and he said that I would stop these immoral acts and would also stop going to dance parties. And I have to stay away from smoking, drinking, and alcohol. He will take me to his house and respect me. So I was surprised that what kind of person is this who does not hate me even after knowing my true identity? I liked that person very much. I promised him that I would really listen to everything he said, make myself noble and worthy of respect, and I did so. He also fulfilled his promise and came to take me to his house, but I was worried thinking whether his parents would accept me. No one would accept a girl like me. But still he assured me that his parents are not like that at all. They will really accept me. So I felt a little relieved, and I went to his house with him. As soon as I entered the house, I saw a man reading a newspaper, with a newspaper in front of his mouth, and that person was none other than my father. The name my mother had told me was my father's. I thought it might be someone else, but as soon as he turned around, I saw the mark on his shoulder that my mother had told me would be on my father's neck. I started to consider myself the luckiest person to be meeting my father after 24 years. Thinking about the circumstances, I felt ashamed once again. I was wondering if the person who had brought me here was my half-brother. I felt strangely happy because if he was my brother, he must have been exactly the same, respectable, lovable. But my father refused to recognize me, and when I told him that he was my father, he turned his back on me and told me to leave because my other mother would never accept me. Shehryar had also heard all this and had locked himself in the room because for a person, this is very painful. His sister is being a part of such filth. I looked at my father in surprise, who was still not ready to accept me as his daughter. Then I remembered that this is the same person who had left me and my mother alone in their difficult situation. Because of this person, my mother had left this world crying, and in her last moments, her last wish was that I should live with my father. But he could not fulfill even her last wish. What kind of person was this? The dream I had brought to this house was shattered as soon as I entered the house, and I felt that once again I was probably being pushed into the same filth and dark streets, but I would not let myself be a part of this filth. I told him my truth and also made him realize that his daughter would pay the price for his actions. When I mentioned my mother, my father's face changed completely. Maybe he was sorry. He broke the heart of a loyal woman. He humiliated his daughter. Fear and remorse were clearly visible on his face, but I didn't care at all because what he had done to my mother was indescribable to me. I never thought that I would meet my father like this. While leaving, I thanked Shehryar and told him that he had come and saved me. Now I will go to the place where his mother has slept forever, and will become the same Rabia as before. It was my misfortune that she met Shehryar like this. Little did I know that the person she was feeling love for in her heart was none other than her half-brother. I thought to myself that perhaps by making a boy like Shehryar my companion, I would live a life of honor. But it seems that fate had something else in mind. The path of my destiny was still written. It had to go on for a long time. But I had decided that after today, I would never go back to this sinful life from which Shehryar had brought me out. While leaving, I said only one thing to my father, that I would never forgive my father. My father is the murderer of my mother. And these words were no less than a lightning bolt for Chavez Khan, who had fallen on him like an atomic bomb. He was gathering himself in the fire of remorse. I once again told my father that I do not want my father to spend his whole life paying for the humiliation he has gone through with money, which no power in the world can pay for a woman's honor. She packed her things and turned to go back, and everyone would watch her go.